Hey, welcome, Facebook and YouTube. We're here this morning to have you a great program. We're going to be talking about some of the latest, greatest things that are going on. We're going to be talking about what's in the news for you to know. So, this is Jim Blythe. Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where our motto is Charlie Mike. Continue the mission. I'm your host, Jim Blythe, U.S. Navy Vietnam veteran and certified senior advisor. Join me as we feature veterans who continue the mission of leadership and commitment in our communities after serving our great nation. Why, you never know who you're going to meet or where we're going to go. So, welcome aboard. Hey, I hope you're having a great day and plugging into March Madness. Me personally, I ain't got time to, to do that. But March is madness, and boy, we've got the reins. Hey, today I've got Captain Marc Liebman, a very good friend of mine. He was a SAR pilot, that's search and rescue for you who don't know what that means, in Vietnam and flying the Hookie Took and flying the Big Mother 40. He is also a phenomenal author. I have enjoyed so many of his books. He's an Amazon best-selling author. You have website, you have
a blog, YouTube channel.
Yeah. And
all
your
that stuff.
YouTube channel is now pretty big.
It's getting bigger.
It's
not
getting
pretty big.
big.
I'm not like Ward Carroll yet, but I'm getting there.
Well, you and
I'm on a 6 and chasing.
Yeah, and one of the things that I wanted to do with the program, and you have become a regular, is to talk about some of the current events because you do so much research. You do so much in what you do and how it relates to us in the United States and to our veterans and military. So, first of all, I need to say thank you to Nathaniel and Ascend Podcasting for putting this together, and to my beautiful wife, Diane, for all that you do. Cedric couldn't be with me today. Cedric White, minister, marriage counselor, is in Uganda. So, say a prayer for him. He's doing missionary work, and I'm very, very proud of him. Great guy. Glad to have him part of the show. Also, I want to say special thank you to Fairway Independent Mortgage, who I work for, is a specialist in reverse lending. Let me tell you, my NMLS number is 311548, and theirs is 2289. We are an equal opportunity lender, and that makes all the attorneys happy. So we are one of the best and biggest in the United States. We're the biggest non-bank lender. So we're here across America to help you VA loans, regular loans, reverse mortgage loans, help you with that planning for your biggest asset, your home. Now, I've done all of that. I want to talk about something that is personal to me right now that's needs to be getting out there.
It's also personal to every veteran once they figure it out or learn about it.
Absolutely. So there has been a big controversy that VA funds are being diverted to be able to use for medical care for the illegal immigrants. That has been denied. That has been denied and denied and denied. But Congressman Mike Bosch, who's chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee, excuse me, has authored a bill in Congress, and Senator Tommy Tuberville has offered a bill in the Senate that's basically no VA resources for illegals. Guys, I just want to say it is happening. We are only half of the way through the fiscal year for the federal government. And from people that have told me, the VA is way behind on its allotted funding. And where I think a lot of that money is going is into this program that they are subverting it through. And if you want to go look it up, you can contact Mike Bosch's his office. The other part of that, and I think this is a huge tragedy, that you're taking money away from men and women who have served this nation and are diverting it. And it's this administration that's doing it. And I probably just made a lot of enemies, but I'm telling you, it wouldn't be a bill going before Congress if it didn't happen. And what I've also found out is one of the things they're doing is cutting community care services. They're doing it across the nation. I'm experiencing it with a company here in Dallas. And I'm telling you, This is something you need to write your congressman. You need to look it up. You need to look up Mike Bosch, Bosh, chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and take a look at that bill and what it's saying. Don't take my word for it because it's being denied, but it's a tremendous scandal that we as veterans need to jump on and say, this has got to stop.
Amen. So as a veteran, and I'm not nearly up to speed as Jim is, but as a veteran, it's an insult. It's egregious. We're the people who protect this country. When I say we in our times as veterans, but I think every veteran that I know, if somebody called them on the phone and said, "Hey, we need you," the question is not where and when, but how do I get there and how fast do you want me? And in return, the VA is part of the promise that will take care of you should you be injured or get sick. And all of us who have served for any length of time have gotten sick on active duty or in the reserves. Some of us, unfortunately, have been seriously wounded or injured, and the VA is charged with taking care of those men and women to whom that's happened. And to take money away from that without asking the veterans if they can and do it sub rosa, in other words, under the table, is just, to me, unconscionable.
So, again, it's being denied, but I'm telling you, go to Congressman Mike Bosch, find out what they're doing. There wouldn't be a bill if there wasn't a need. And within what happened in the acts that brought about community care, they left a loophole that it's up to the VA to be able to designate those funds. And so right now, because the VA is running short on funds, guess where they're getting their funds out of and not putting them into? And that's community care. And community care is important. We fought for that. I'm not saying the VA is bad. That is the largest health system in the world. They stand up. They do well on surveys. They're as good as probably any major medical center. I believe in it. Dr. Stephen Holt is a dear friend of mine. He's the chief medical officer for the VA for the state of Texas. He was the director of Dallas. I think the world of Jason Cave, the director of Dallas. The people in the VA are phenomenal. What I'm seeing, though, is they are hamstrung, and I'm just going to come right out and say it. It's this administration. And I got to tell you, I'm neither a Democrat nor a Republican, but this administration and its leadership is horrible for veterans. And they would deny it, but I'm telling you, it's the reality. So now let's change the subject to even more important things because, Mark, you and I talked, and one of the things is I'm so busy with what I do that I am not as current on world affairs and world topics as I really want to be. And we talked about this. So one of the things I said is let's focus because you do so much more research than I'm able to do. So let's talk about right now, right off the bat, number one on your list was this administration wants to build a port in Gaza.
Yeah, so the war in Gaza, we can talk about it if you want, but the war in Gaza has displaced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who are living in Gaza. Now, the fact that they voted for Hamas overwhelmingly, okay, but what's happening is that their homes are being destroyed. Many of them who are working in Israel no longer can't go back into Israel to their jobs for obvious reasons. And so you have a humanitarian crisis. So there's two questions. So question one is, the U.S. has stepped up and said, look, we're going to build a port and we're going to bring supplies in via that port. We tried dropping stuff in via parachute. Yesterday, there was a report about somebody got hit in the head by a pallet. My view is if you're in the drop zone and you're not looking up, you have another issue. But anyway, so the airdrops have been unsuccessful. Truck convoys have been unsuccessful for a variety of reasons, and mostly led to Hamas, and the Israelis wanted to search them to make sure they're not carrying contraband. So the Biden administration said, look, Gaza's on the water, we'll build a port. if you want to think about this in terms of Mulberry from D-Day, that's fine. What it is, it's a floating pier. And Nathan, can you pop up the picture? And what you do is you anchor this thing, and this is just a photo I pulled off the Washington Post. And this is, it's assembled, it literally is like Lego blocks, and you can build piers, docks, and everything else in this, and you anchor it to the seabed. And you do it so that it's far enough out into the ocean so large ships that can come in can tie up to it, or at least anchor off of it. And then you have a way to get the supplies that are unloaded ashore. It could be anywhere from a pier to what they call lighters, which are cargo carrying small boats. We can use LCACs from the amphibs if we want. It's a great idea, but it's in a war zone. And the question now becomes is, okay, you have this pier, ships tie up and they unload, but the real problem is distribution. How are you going to get it to the people? Who's going to control that? And right now, there is some disagreement as to who should control that. Hamas wants to control it so they can feed their surviving fighters. The Israelis want to control it to make sure there's no contraband, and also to reward those who help them. And then UNRWA, who, by the way, had employees who participated in the original massacres, wants to control it, saying we're the United Nations Relief Agency. It's one of the more corrupt, at least in that part of the world, organizations. They want to control it. So ultimately, they'll sort that out. But it's a simple thing. And they're saying there are the Biden administration is saying there's going to be no boots on the ground, U.S. boots on the ground. Well, that's kind of hard to believe, because who's going to run the lighters and trucks coming down the pier, or the LCACs? Those are all U.S. citizens. And who's going to man the pier? Who's going to provide security? All that kind of good stuff. Now, I also fear that some bright bulb or dim bulb in Hamas or some other terrorist organizations, hey, this is a really juicy target, particularly that ship that's anchored off the pier a quarter mile from the beach. I can fire rockets at it. So stand by. It's a great idea, but the proof will be in the execution. Can the United States military do this? Yes. Can we do it effectively? Yes. Can we protect at least to the point where the supplies arrive on shore? Yes. But the fundamental issue here is this is an Arab problem. And I don't see the Arabs involved in this. And the reason I say it's an Arab problem is because in many ways it's their money, and they're the ones who won't take the refugees into their countries. So the rest of the world, nobody wants the Palestinians. That's a whole nother conversation. So the question is now, who's going to pick up the tab?
Hey, Mark, one of the questions that I've got, it appears for me, again, I'm isolated. I don't know, because I'm working so hard. Isn't one of the problems, or isn't one of the things that happened was Hamas and Hezbollah felt like the rest of the Arabian world would jump on the bandwagon? They haven't. Is that correct or not?
Sort of. It's directionally correct. So here's the problem. I said this a few seconds ago. Nobody in the Arab world wants to deal with the Palestinians. I'll use the word pariahs, because they see them as radicals. They see them as corrupt. Not that the Arab world is not, governments are not corrupt. Some of them are, some of them aren't. We can get into that conversation if you want. But the fact of the matter is, they won't take them in as refugees, and they haven't since 1948. So now we have this huge problem in the West Bank and in Gaza, where you have these thousands of Palestinians who support Hamas. Again, they overwhelmingly voted to put Hamas in power in Gaza. They overwhelmingly support the PLO and its policies. And so the Arab countries look at them as, why would I bring these terrorists into my country?
Yeah.
And they don't. And so another thing that the media doesn't mention is that during the Gulf War in 1991, the first Gulf War, after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, the PLO under Yasser Arafat publicly supported Saddam Hussein. Well, what he failed to remember, or he didn't remember, or didn't care, or didn't think that the Arabs would do anything, there were thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, probably 100,000 Palestinians working as contract workers in Kuwait, the UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia, etc., Bahrain, Qatar, and they all yanked their visas and said, "Here's a bus, bye," and they expelled them. So suddenly, two things happen: one, the PLO now has all these people back, and two, the money that they were sending back, because these were well-paying jobs in relative speaking to what they could earn in the West Bank, and they were sent back. So they lost the income, and suddenly they had an influx of people who now were jobless. And so this is not the first time that this has happened. And until the PLO recognizes the right of the state of Israel to exist and renounces terrorism, okay, that's number one. That's number one. It has to happen. This will continue. There are two other things that have to happen. One, the Arab world has to say, and they have quietly, the right of the state of Israel to exist. The Abraham Accords are Exhibit A. And then the third problem is located in Tehran. Until the Iranians stop funding these organizations, and again, they provide most of the support for Hamas and Hezbollah, this is going to continue. And by the way, other terrorist organizations, this is going to continue.
So you have factions basically in Tehran that are funding this, and so many of the Palestinians are basically fomenting terrorism.
Yeah,
Now,
so hold on a second, Jim. Let me correct you. So what you have is a government run by fanatic mullahs who have publicly stated they want to destroy the state of Israel. They are currently funding, directly or indirectly, over 25 terrorist organizations, names of them, and I'll explain what I mean by names in a second, in the Middle East, all which have the goal of attacking or destroying Israel. So some of these terrorist organizations are in name only because they conduct an attack and then they disappear. But Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Al-Aqsa Brigade, there's a whole host of them. Fatah. I hear music in my headset.
Yeah, we're getting ready to take a break. So let me interrupt. What we're talking about is what's going on in the world, what's going on in Israel, but also what our government is doing or not doing, and some of the things that are going on there. Because you need to know why. This affects you. This affects all of us economically. This terrorist organization, let's go back to 9/11. Let's go back to 9/11. And let's also take a look at Kuwait and other countries. So when we come back, we're going to be talking more about world events and how they impact you. This is Jim Blythe, and I've got Marc Liebman, Captain, U.S. Navy. We're here for you. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. Hey, I hope you're having a great day. I am. Sorry, we've got a norther that just blew through, and my allergies are going nuts. So I apologize if I cough. Just forgive me, okay? Now, let's talk. We're talking about this, and on the world stage, we're talking about terrorism. Talk about Marc, Sudan and the Houthis, because what's going on there with Iran and Sudan is a very dangerous situation.
Yeah, so what's happened is we had a series of attacks by the Houthis on shipping in the Gulf of Aden. And then the U.S. tried a couple of slaps on the hand, and finally the missiles didn't stop. And so we launched a series of airstrikes not only on the Houthi sites in western Yemen and the area that they control, but also against some rebels, or some Iranian-supported rebels in Syria and Iraq, who are attacking U.S. Forces in both Iraq, and there are still some there, and Jordan, and in Syria. So all those things went on, and then there was a massive airstrike that basically took out a lot more, which should have been done on day one. But again, the United States has this thing of we'll just kind of smack you. No, when you're dealing with a bully, you hit him in the nose, you knock out a few teeth, and then maybe he'll get the idea that he's not supposed to come at you. So, so the Houthis have kind of dialed it back a little bit, primarily because a lot of their inventory of missiles went up in smoke on the second series of attacks. But also, they realize that if they continue this, the attacks might get more dramatic. So, and things like the United States might get smart and say, look, we got all these naval vessels from a coalition. We might want to impose a blockade on Yemen. We've already seized, in fact, we lost 2 SEALs on what's called a vessel search and seizure operation, which we found hundreds of bits and pieces of missiles that the Houthis have. The IRGC is involved with the Houthis because they're providing the technical support to launch the missiles. So all that's going on. And it's sort of stopped. The next move that the Iranians have done is they've opened negotiations with the Sudanese, which is a Muslim country on the Gulf of Aden, to have a naval base in which Iranian Navy ships will be based in the Red Sea. Now, there's already one ship in the Iranian Navy ship in the Gulf, and it has been we have intelligence that has been providing intelligence to the Houthis on location of ships for targeting purposes. When the U.S. said, we think that's not a good idea, you might want to move that ship because something might happen to it, the ship suddenly disappeared out into the Indian Ocean, but we know it's still there. So the Iranians want to build a naval base in Sudan to deploy Iranian naval assets and to support Hamas, what's going on in Gaza. And this is not a good thing. We already have a Chinese naval base in Djibouti. And the Chinese, by the way, joined the coalition that was supposedly protecting the commercial shipping that's going through the Gulf of Aden. However, on several occasions, Chinese naval vessels were nearby ships being attacked, and the Chinese naval vessels did nothing. Nothing. In fact, there are some wags in the talking head community that believe that Chinese ships are part of the coalition only to gather intelligence, which is obviously true, but that's the fact that they've done nothing. So we now have French, German, British, Australian, I believe there's Canadian ships out there, and there are also some from the GCC nations. So the coalition is building. It's not under the command of the United States Navy. It's under a different commander, but we participate. But the muscle is painted gray, and it says the ships begin with U.S.S. Pick a name.
Yeah.
And we're going to have an aircraft carrier in that neck of the woods for the foreseeable future. And the problem is that the United States Navy, more so than any other service, is horribly overextended. We're horribly underfunded for maintenance and training, and we don't have enough ships to carry out the missions for which we have treaty obligations.
Okay, so I let me take the counterpoint and say, why are we there? This is not the United States. That's the other side of the world. Why are we there? Why are we defending Israel? Why are we doing this? Well, I got to tell you, Israel is the stabilizing force in the Middle East.
Yes, it is.
And Mark, what would you say if your gas went to $8 a gallon?
Well, it caused a huge recession in the United States. So it's not so much about the Gulf of Aden is not so much about gas, at least to the United States, or gas and oil. It is to other countries. But what is being forced here is a change in shipping schedule. So to avoid the Gulf of Aden, they're going around Africa, 6,000 miles farther. That's more cost, more fuel, or more cost, which fuel is part of it. But the big problem is there are so many factories today that run on what's called JIT, just-in-time manufacturing. So the parts arrive, they're sorted, counted, put in their proper bins. In fact, they're probably even barcoded so they go to the right proper bins. Anyway, so the idea is to minimize the production inventory. Well, suddenly those parts aren't there. So it's causing a huge disruption in the world's economy. when the shipping companies elect not to go through the Gulf of Aden. So that's number one. Number two is many of the Arab nations realize, particularly the GCC countries, but I'll include Jordan and Egypt, that their bread is buttered on the Israeli side. Israel is seen as the technological powerhouse in the Middle East, and it's probably one of the ones in the world. So I'll just leave it at that. So,
All right, when we come back, we're going to continue the conversation of why. Why are we even there? Why are we doing it? We're doing it to take care of ourselves as well as take care of the rest of the world, because they have avowed. Matter of fact, Iran hates Saudi Arabia. They hate the other countries. Bahrain is sitting in a terrible position as far as physically being located.
And Qatar,
And
right across the
Qatar.
Gulf.
And so here's the thing. If we let all this go, it's going to be a world mess. And these radicals want that. You want to live in that kind of terrible situation? I don't. So we're going to be right back as we talk more about current events. These are unpleasant subjects. We're not holding back. We're talking about these things so you can look it up. This is Veterans Impact. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. This is Jim Blythe, and I've got Captain Marc Liebman, United States Navy SAR pilot, retired, great guy, great author. Go to markliebman.com, right, Mark?
That's it.
And take a look. If you want to know a great book about Vietnam, go to his Cherubs 3, right?
Cherubs 2.
Cherubs 2 and Big Mother 40. You want to know something about history. One of the most amazing things about his history books that I have read that are so amazing is they go into the research of that time, and they're just absolutely phenomenal. Now, his current books, these are the Age of Sail. We're putting it up there. He starts talking about how the innovations in technology changed that. And he talks about the characters and the women's involvement. You got to read this because it's amazing and it's fun.
Thank you.
I think you're up there with Tom Clancy.
Thank you. I wish I had book sales of Tom Clancy. Anyway, by the way, I have a new book out called Red Star Death.
Yeah, I got to read that.
And it's another one. It's sort of a counterterrorism. It's a follow-on to one of the books in the Josh Heyman series. Let me come back to another myth that's being you start hearing. So one of the things that everybody's afraid of is that, oh my God, the Iranians are going to close the Straits of Hormuz.
Uh-huh.
They'll never do it.
No,
And
cut
here's
their
why.
own throat.
That's exactly right. They'll cut their own throat. Understand that India gets most of its oil from, guess where? Iran and the Middle East. Excuse me, the Gulf of the countries along the southern littoral of the Arabian Gulf, which if you're sitting in Tehran is known as the Persian Gulf. If you're sitting in Saudi Arabia, it's the Arabian Gulf. And countries like the People's Republic of China get most of their oil from Iran and also the same GCC states. So the Iranians are never going to close the Straits of Hormuz. Now, will they try to attack ships that are not going to their customers? Possibly. But then again, that's a double-edged sword because the U.S. doesn't, the U.S. can just sit outside in international waters and see ships going to countries that we don't like, People's Republic of China. So they'll never do it. The problem is that the Biden administration has eased up the sanctions to allow the Iranians to sell oil to their customers as opposed to going to those customers and saying, oh, by the way, here are other countries that can provide you with this oil. And some of them are even closer. Like if you're in India, Indonesia is a lot closer than Iran. If you're in the People's Republic of China, Indonesia is a lot closer to Iran. And guess who else is closer? Us and the Canadians. And we have a surplus of oil. So there are other places where these countries that are dependent on Iranian oil can get oil. The problem is that the Biden administration has elected, and by the way, the Obama administration did the same thing, elected not to fully enforce the sanctions. And as a result, the Iranian government is getting a tremendous amount of money from these oil sales. Now, contrast with the Trump. And by the way, I am not a fan of Donald Trump. I want to make this perfectly clear. But what he did was he said, no, this is BS. Sanctions are sanctions, and you will obey them. And suddenly the money dried up. And for 4 years, and by the end of the Trump administration, the Iranian economy was on its knees. And so what you saw was black market sales, and also what little they could get out through the pipelines into Europe. And I hate to say it, but one of our allies, France, was behind a lot of this stuff because two large French oil exploration companies have a huge investment in Iran. And until that stops and the income stops, Iran will continue to have a surplus of money that they can invest, if you want to use that terms, in terrorist organizations. So some people say it's all about the money. In this case, it is, because the lack of money will change behavior. So anyway.
Several major issues here. First of all, a lot of people say, well, let's stop the use of fossil fuels. Climate change is so important. This is not, you cannot stop the use of fossil fuels from the standpoint of everything we touch. Everything we touch is affected, from the clothes we're wearing to the food we eat, is affected by fossil products, petroleum. Okay, you shut that down, you're going to put this whole world into a age of darkness.
Yeah, so fossil fuels generate, and the byproducts generate things like fabrics, they have fertilizers, medicines, a whole bunch of stuff besides just fueling cars. Now, we can have a debate as to we need to go to electric cars or whatever, and wind energy and solar energy and all that kind of renewable fuels. But the fact of the matter is that fossil fuels are the lifeblood of the world today. And oh, by the way, despite what the anti-fossil fuel people think, we're not running out. The world has more proven reserves now than it did 20 years ago. And where we, at least the United States, are consuming less and less of it every year, and is most of the Western Europe. The big consumers that have not reduced their consumption of fossil fuels is, guess who? The People's Republic of China. Also in India. But most of the South American countries and the U.S. and Canada have their fossil fuel consumption is dropping at the rate of 3% per annum. Europe is probably about the same, and going in the other direction is the PRC in India. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And in the case of India, it's trying to catch up to the rest of the world, because India for decades was a third and fourth world country. I've traveled to India. I've traveled all over India, both on business. And I watched through the 90s and the early 2000s the transformation of India. It's got a long way to go. And if you cut off fossil fuels to them, it's going to be a disaster. The Chinese, on the other hand, are a different conversation. Its economy is also a mess, but for different reasons. And ultimately, they don't have the political and economic mechanisms in a controlled society to stabilize it and fix it. And that's one of the things that Xi Jinping is struggling with today. The Indians, on the other hand, while they're socialists, they're democratic socialists. They're more like European countries than they are like the republic that we are. But they have the mechanisms left over by the British, by the way, that they inherited. And India's problem is size, people size, geography size, and also they have a corruption problem. But again, they're working at it. And the wheels turn slowly.
Well, one of the big things with China, and I suspect it's part of India too, is food shortage. Food is hugely important. I talked with Ken George, who was a ambassador to a South American country. I got him to speak at Navy League, and he talks about the Chinese opening these ports and controlling the sea lanes because they're trying to make sure that they have enough food. It's a huge, huge problem. That's why they're buying farms in the United States, and that's become a huge scandal.
Yes.
Basically, they cannot support themselves. Now, let's go back in history of the not the tradition. The tradition of those cultures in those countries is to conquer and take. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, you're a historian. So if that's their culture and that's what they're going to do, what are they going to do to the rest of the world? And again, when you're talking about the mullahs in Iran, and I have a lot of Iranian friends and Bahrainian friends, and I have Muslim friends, it's a philosophy to take and conquer and kill.
Yeah. So if you take, so Islam is divided roughly into two pieces: the Shias and the Sunnis. And I'm not qualified to get into a detailed discussion but they are fundamentally separate, pretty much like Protestants and Catholics. Um, and it's and so Iran is Shia, and they are in the minority in the Arab world. Most of the rest of the Arab world is Sunni, and I actually have the figures by country of the split, but it's about a 60-40 split. Some countries it's 70-30, but always in favor of, except Iran, of the Sunnis. And Islam, and you can go back and read it, and I have quotes from it, is very intolerant of other religions. They refer to us as non-believers and infidels, and there are passages in the Quran that literally say it's okay to kill the infidel, it's okay to lie to an infidel, it's okay to deceive an infidel, as long as you remain true to Islam. So again, this is the philosophy of a country that is stirring up a lot of problems. The PRC is actually on a different path. The PRC looks at the world, and they refer to the period where the Europeans had enclaves in what was then known as China, and literally controlled the economy. They refer to that as the 150 years of shame. And
Imperialism.
yeah, it was imperialism to its very core, and colonialism
It was terrible.
to its very core. So part of their philosophy under Mao is to steal everything they can, because they felt for 150 years uh, the West stole from, I use the West, Europeans, because the United States didn't have one of those enclaves. It was the French, the British, and the Germans, to be precise. And they feel they have a right to steal stuff from us. And over the past 20 years, you've seen the greatest theft of intellectual property in everything, every industry: medicine, defense, aerospace, automotive, manufacturing of all kinds, by the People's Republic of China. The fact of the matter is it's ongoing, and until the West stops it, or begins to prevent it, which we're suddenly starting to wake up to, it's going to continue. But again, you have a communist system that is top-down driven, and it dictates what's going on, and it's failing for a variety of reasons. Their real estate's overbuilt. They have companies that borrow money that are totally unprofitable, and the banks just keep feeding them cash, because unemployment, feeding people, even though it's make work or they're producing stuff that nobody wants, is more important than solving the fundamental economics. And the other thing is, it's coming back to bite them, as their one-child policy.
Let me let me go again to the 20,000-foot view. Culturally, you go back in these countries, these what we call third, fourth world countries today. China has come out of that, no doubt about it. But their philosophy going way back was there was no safety net. You could starve to death. People did starve to death. And when governments were taken over, they didn't just say, okay, you're not elected, you can go home.
No,
Same thing is true in
you're
Russia.
killed.
They got killed, and their family got killed, and their followers got killed, and everybody got killed. So they have a very, very, very violent history, and a history, and this is something Americans I don't think understand, a history to win at all cost.
And,
At all cost.
yeah, and a long-term view.
And
So the United States, and I tell people this, is a terrible ally historically. Why? Well, every 4 years, sometimes every 8 years, policies change. and I'm going to pick on the Biden administration only because it's current, and and he was the most open about it. He had all these day one initiatives. So if Trump did it, he would do the opposite. Now, some of his, again, you can argue with some of them, but some of them were stupid. Open border is just one. Trump was trying to close the border. No, I'm going to stop the wall. And in fact, I'm going to open borders. So you see this. So the U.S. policy changes, and that's not just domestic policy, it's foreign policy. Ask the Kurds. The Kurds have been supported by the U.S., then sold down the river a couple times, supported by the U.S., sold down the river. Today, we're supporting them. In fact, the Kurdish state in northern Iraq is a result of U.S. support, but it hasn't always been that way. So the policies change, which make us a very unreliable ally. The Brits, on the other hand, essentially foreign policy is run by the professionals, and it's consistent. Now, you may not like it, but it's at least consistent, and you know where they're coming from. But in this next election, we have a war in Ukraine, and candidate Trump thinks he can stop it. Well, he's naive, and I think reality will show up if he gets into the White House. But we have a U.S. president who has not made the case for the most significant war since World War II, because if the Russians win or prevail, then you can see more bad behavior by Putin, assuming he's still alive, and his followers, and it will encourage bad behavior by the gentleman living in Beijing and the gentleman living in Tehran, which, by the way, they're all allied.
Let's define that bad behavior. Let's just define it. Basically, what Putin wants
Conquest.
to do is to restore the old Soviet Union, because that's his power base. So one of the things is their economy is having trouble. We know their military is having trouble. We know that so much money has been stolen from their oil sales and all to the people that are running under Putin. So all of a sudden, how do you maintain power? Well, you go start a war, you conquer somebody else, take away from them. Ukraine is also the breadbasket of that part of the world, or it has been, correct?
Ukraine provides somewhere around, and I've seen numbers ranging from 10 to 30% of the world's wheat.
Yeah.
Now, it has not produced that for 2 years, for obvious reasons. And so when you look at who can feed the world, okay, starts with the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah.
Argentina, Australia, to some degree New Zealand, and we've suddenly run out.
Yeah. Now,
hold on a second. Europe can feed itself. Okay, so there and most of South America, back Chile, and I would add Chile to the list with Argentina. But after you get past those countries, most of the rest of the world imports food.
yes.
And again, so the Ukrainian grain exports was a big issue about 2 or 3 months ago, because the Russians didn't stop agreeing to the treaty they had to allow the grain ships to leave.
So let's go back to just one thing, because I want to make a point. You talked about former President Trump, and let me tell you, his policies were what are bringing people together. His own personal behavior is what drives the people apart. If I could sit down with a man over a cup of coffee, I'd say, change your rhetoric. But his policies really help. The policies of the current administration are killing us. So when we come back, we don't want to be political, but we are, because it's part of what affects you as an American. So this is Jim Blythe and Marc Liebman. We're going to be right back after these words from all of our partners. This is the Veterans Impact Show. We're here for you today. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. Hey, thank you for being on board. Share us, subscribe to our YouTube, help us to grow and to get out there. If you belong to a VSO, get this out, send it out to your buddies in the VSO. We send a lot of this out. We are trying to reach everybody out there with important issues to veterans, very, very important issues to our whole nation as well. Our idea is to bring this country back together and have us all working together as a team, regardless of race, religion, etc. And one of the things that's going on in this world are terrorists, for whatever reason, who want to kill us, who want to destroy us. We saw that in 9/11. We're seeing it around the world. We're seeing what we've had to do. You may or may not agree, but let me tell you, would you like to have your city blown up? Would you like to have your city attacked? I don't think so. And part of the problem, in my opinion, is our international view is to not win. Our international view is to just play the game and slap them, and say, don't do that anymore. There's a point when you're dealing with radicalized people, as we learned in Germany and Japan, you've got to take away their ability to create war. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Teddy Roosevelt had the best policy of all: walk softly and carry a big stick.
Yeah, and I think that it's unfortunate, but that's human nature. And when you're thinking about countries that could starve to death, that are willing to kill you and willing to take over, and people go, oh, come on, Jim. No, we've both been in cultures, in countries that they have a totally different philosophy.
Can I add something here?
Yeah, please.
So a friend of mine, because I won't claim this, said to me, it's the best way to fight terrorism is one of the things to do is to make sure that the mother and the father have a roof over their head, food on the table, medicine for their sick children, and a hope for a better life for their children. Okay?
Absolutely.
Now, they will be less likely to strap 10 pounds of C4 to their chest and walk into a crowded marketplace and literally pull the trigger. However, the problem we have is we have this whole idea of measured escalation. I lived through my Vietnam tour where we were, gradually escalating, and then we'd stop. We'd gradually escalate, and then we'd stop. We did the same thing in Korea. Well, we just want to do this. No.
We never fought to win. We never fought to win.
So part of the problem is the President of the United States, the current President of the United States, has not made a case to the American public as to why it is important for the Ukrainians to win, and in this case, Israel is to win. And right now, Joe Biden is trying to yank the rug out under the Israelis' feet, and he ran into resistance not only in this country but pretty much the rest of the world. But in the Ukraine, you have every NATO nation. There's now 32 of them, because Sweden's now joined, and the president or the Secretary General of NATO has said Ukraine must prevail. There is one man who has not said that. He said, we're going to provide them everything that they need. We're not going to put boots in the ground. We'll support them in their fight, blah, 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 blah. But Joe Biden has never made the case as to why it is important for the Ukrainians to win. Now, let's define win. One is the expelling all the Russian soldiers from their soil. That's number one. Number two, they need to have guarantees of security and an agreement from the Russians, which Putin will never do, or may never do, that they will not invade again. And number three, they have to have a path, and they already have one, to the EU, but ultimately to join NATO. Because once that's defined and once their application is submitted, they suddenly become covered with more security guarantees. And what's interesting about the war in Ukraine is when I talk to British and French and even Canadians, they are now appalled, and they're going, oh my God, this is Hitler all over again.
Thank you.
And
I've been wanting to say that.
And they're struggling because most of NATO, France and Germany particularly, have been spending less than 1%. Canada's 0.8%. Okay, but most of them, particularly the former Warsaw Pact nations, are pretty much all close to 2% or above. But the rest of NATO is saying, oh my God, this is a real threat to us. The problem is they don't have the economic capacity at the moment to fight and support against Russia. But you add in the United States, and Biden went through and just put parts of the defense industry on a war footing, we can logistically support them, and the Ukrainians will have everything they need. And what part of the business case, or the case that Biden needs to make is, number one, we start doing this with the defense industry. Guess what? That's money pumped into the United States economy. Those are jobs, well-paying jobs with benefits. Okay, these are American citizens going to work and getting well paid, and also out of that comes a lot of technology that we all can use eventually. Things like GPS.
Let me go. You mentioned Hitler. A lot of people, if I said Neville Chamberlain, they don't know who I'm talking about. But he was Prime Minister of England at that time, and he kept capitulating to Hitler. What happened is Hitler ended up killing, I don't know, 6 million Jews, but millions and millions of Europeans.
20 million Europeans died.
And basically destroyed.
Germany.
Watch some of the films of when they rolled into Paris, what they did to Belgium, what they did to the Eastern European countries, Czechoslovakia. And then what happened is the Russians replaced them in basically taking over those countries, Yugoslavias and the Bulgarias and
Romania,
Czechoslovakia, all that.
Hungary, Poland,
And
Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia.
They weren't nice to people. They murdered them. We don't want that to happen to us, and that's where we're setting ourselves up for World War III. So I want to say thank you for being part of Veterans Impact Show. Say a quick prayer. Lord God, King of the universe, thank you for putting a hedge of protection upon our active duty military and first responders. Lord God, protect them, keep them safe, and wake this nation up, Lord God, to be able to come together and work together to make this one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
Marc, thank you so much for this combination history lesson, and current events. Pay attention. I am. Look at what's going on and look at what's being done. I'm not anti-Joe Biden. I'm not anti-Donald Trump. I'm saying we've got to take care of the United